Which leads me to my next question is, what do you all think the current day movements that we should be rallying around are?
That's an interesting one, because me and Terrance kind of had like a powwow in the hall, and I talked about the problem has to be that when we're dealing with so many different people and we have so many different organizations out here, everyone looks at a particular problem and say that's the most important thing. And then I always kind of, with my retrospect, look at, you know, Gary and Ann and say to myself that that's something that I would like to see happen again. You know, groups come together and we sit down at the table and we identify those issues and problems and come up with a plan to move forward with. I mean, we can look at the biggest problem I told Terrance that I thought was economics. I look at, you know, the majority of cities that are out here where black people live in, and I look at the percentage of unemployment in those cities, and they've skyrocketed since this whole economic crisis. And you can't take care of yourself or your family or pay rent or buy a house or buy groceries if you don't have a job. And so one of the things that me and Terrance did talk about was that when we look at the structure of unemployment in our community is not, I don't believe it's by accident, even though we have situations that occur because of corporations and states and all these people having budgetary issues. There was always structural unemployment within the black community, and that's been consistent. Mm-hmm. The question has to be, or one of the issues has to be, is we have to determine for ourselves how to make that hamburger, or how to maybe make those chicken wings so that we're not buying it from the Asian man that comes to our community, or we're not buying the fruits and vegetables from them, but we're the ones actually growing this stuff, and we're actually the ones that are distributing that. We're actually creating businesses with our own communities and self-sustaining businesses so we can employ those people from within our own communities.
Yeah, and you know, economics is important, but I think we have to have a better understanding of what that entails, whether it's budgeting, right, whether it's being able to run your own businesses. You and I have talked many times about the fact that there are some very talented people in right, the community of people of African descent. You know, really good lawyers, artists, you know, in every field that you can think about, but they're not concerned with the administrative aspect, you know, the aspect that's outside of their specialty. And you have to run a business, you have to be concerned with all of those things. So I think it's important that we get a perspective on that. What's interesting, again, moving back to the civil rights movement, is the Albany movement. When they had the movement up in Albany, they talked about the fact that when they were boycotting, they got to the point where the people only bought food and medicine for a year because they were boycotting everything else. So you have to make, you know, your impression has to be felt within the community that is oppressing you if you feel that that's the situation. Terry, what about you? What do you think the movements we should be rallying around now are?
Well, I think that absent a cultural foundation, any movement is doomed. I think that really one of the things that we have to do is look inside ourselves. I think that whether you're talking about cooperative economics, you're talking about a justice system, you're talking about an educational system, a religious belief system, those things are found within the context of our culture that are by and large uncorrupted. So I think that you know, the African proverb says no matter how high a house is built, it has to stand on something. I think that a cultural foundation has to be what our house of resurrection has to stand on. Number two, I think that the question is extremely broad because we don't have a black community. Right. We have multiple black communities, multiple black societies, multiple stratas within the totality. So I think that one of the things that we have to do is perhaps have people, once we have the cultural foundation at each level, come together and address their particular issues and not see that my issue is detracting from your issue, right, but it is enhancing the collective for the better whole.
I agree. I agree. And the reason I say movements, because the individual movements, whether it was the lunch counter movement or the bus boycott, et cetera, in current day, we have police brutality, stop and frisk.
No.
We have issues that are of concern, especially to young people, because a lot of young people are experiencing that. And it's interesting that during the civil rights movement, a good portion of the people who did this were young students. People. They were young people, you know.
Especially in the Albany movement.
But young people have to be the vanguard to some degree of their own movement. we have to humble themselves to know that we are in fact in transition from warriors to elders and respect our eldership. However, they have to be the vanguard of their own movement.
Right.
And like I said, why the boycott was so important to me, because it wasn't a flash in the pan. They have to see it as something that they may have to endure for a period of time and sacrifice. And then they can get the resolution that they want to do. But they have to make that commitment and have that sacrificial self as part of their spirit. And you can get that by embracing your culture and understanding it.
Yeah, and they have to sacrifice for the future, because a lot of the young people that were during the marches, a lot of the young people that were arrested because the adults had to go to work. You know, they had to be able to keep a job, to put food on the table, etc. So the young people were out there marching. The students, the people who could afford to spend the day in jail or go through whatever they were going through, because actually it's their future. And that's why I think we need to look at the movements of today, because a lot of the young people, what's going on today, if it gets worse, it's only going to make their future worse.
Yeah, and the thing that was interesting about the Albany movement, but most people saw it as a failure, but it was actually a success, because it taught them what they should do, or there was like a training ground to learn how to deal with these organizations that are out there, like the police department and the fire department and these businesses, and to make sure that they didn't make the same mistakes they made previously. So, I mean, that's why I say to Terrance, sometimes failure is a good thing, because if we learn from it, then we can move forward.
Yeah.
I still like to win, though, brother.
I like to win too now. I like to win too. I like to win too.
Well, Terry, you mentioned culture, and that's normally, as we started out the show, that's normally where I like to start, because I think the culture in its preserved state, in its original state of African people, is before slavery, and it's before we came here, because to define culture, we're talking about traditions, practices, food you eat, clothing you wear, all the things that make a cultural group. And the culture of African people was very different than what we see in current day. Even though some of the things filter through because they're just a part of us, it's been diluted to our detriment. And I think we need to enhance some of the aspects of our culture that I think have been preserved in some cases, or should be preserved. So I want to go into a few of the things that we've learned, although in Africa many things are going to be different depending on the region that you're in. But there are some basic cultural commonalities, such as respect for your elders. I'd like you to talk a little bit about that.
Well, I think Maurice offered earlier, he talked about economics being a true foundation for liberation and independence. And liberation and independence are two different things. Certainly one being free and one being independent from what held you captivity is distinctly different. However, just something as simple when we talk about economics is the African philosophy, I eat, you eat, meaning that I want a good of service, you want to pay me for a good of service, but when we have that transaction, we both leave with what we had, and no one is marginalized, nobody is compromised, nobody's exploited at the end of that. So we can employ that I eat, you eat philosophy in our communities. The same thing is that we are in African culture, it was codified for the first time that humans are in the image of God. We are divine beings, hewn by God. So therefore, if that concept infused our communities, then I can't look at Maurice as Maurice. Maurice is a manifestation of God, and so are you. And therefore, understanding that he and you are a manifestation of God, then there's certain things I can't do. There's certain boundaries that I cannot do to transgress against the creator of the universe, which a part of you is empowered by.
Yeah, your phrase reminds me of the African phrase, I am we, which was a concept that was spoken about a lot during the civil rights era, where they were saying that the good of the whole is as important as the good of the individual. So materialism and all those other things weren't important, because you were just looking, you weren't whole until the group was whole.
Absolutely.
And that's where a lot of things like it takes a village to raise a child, the whole extended family concept comes from, which is important to the African culture. Maurice, you want to talk a little bit about the extended family?
Yeah, I think that the family is the building block for any community, and when we move out from community, we move into states, and we move into nations, and we move into countries. And I think that it's very important that we get back to that whole sense of extended family. I know, like I told people before, that I used to, if I did something wrong, I got beat all the way up the block, until I got to my parents, and then I got another beating and stuff. And so, I also know that when someone didn't have something, you know, or maybe I had a potato and you had some carrots or whatever, and someone had some chicken broth. We put it together in the pot and everybody ate together. And so the whole sense of community, which I think is lost, the sense of family and the importance of it, we have to get back to that. I think that a lot of times when we're dealing with our young people, I kind of feel that we have someone else kind of filling in the blanks, okay? They're like automatons. They're like or machines that someone else is instilling their values and their culture into them. And I think that when we start with the whole idea of family and they understand the importance of it and where it comes from, that they can move forward and they can be nurtured the proper way.
Yeah, and it's very important, not only because a lot of times we recognize in history, as well as in movies like Roots and things of that nature, that when your culture is your strength, and anytime a group is conquered, when they try and remove your strength, they remove your culture. They change the names of things, they make you do their practices, their traditions, you know, all of the things that are aspects of you are removed so that you can be weakened as a people.
As a tangible thing that we can do now, anyone can do, institute one thing, one day a week that the entire family participates in. Something simple like that. You know, I'm very solution oriented. Something as simple as that, where there's no Xbox, there's no going out, there's no movies, and that thing we're going to do every week at this time. And then it will mushroom. You'll begin to know the people in your home, because many people don't even know the people in their home. They're just cohabitants. The door opens, closes, you don't even know who opened to close the door. You know, so we can get back to that, and you begin to love and embrace your family. No, really, Dad is working hard, and I'm seeing that Dad is making those sacrifices. And wow, I didn't know how much time Mom put in, but you know, that's important. And the son, he's trying. He doesn't get the algebra, but he's trying hard, and you get to bring that cohesiveness back, to bring the village and the state and the nation and the world back.
Yeah, I agree, and hopefully if we learn a little bit more about each other and about our culture, we'll be able to strengthen and advance as a people, because all these things that we're talking about, whether it's respect for elders, extended family, connection to nature, all of these things strengthen us as a people. But we have run out of time, and hopefully we can continue this discussion another time. But I would like to thank you both for joining me on this very special Black History.